If you have ever had trouble choosing ammunition for battle or would like to learn more about it, stay because I have prepared something very interesting for you. Today we will go through every type of ammo in the game and I will explain everything step by step. Just a quick note, there are chapters in the video so you can search for the projectile you are interested in. So the first round we're starting with is AP. This is one of the most common shells in lower BRs. It is a basic solid steel shot which is entirely reliant on kinetic energy to penetrate and deal damage. It is not very effective against angled armor. Most of the time this projectile causes damage from the kinetic energy of the impact itself. Therefore shooting important components of the tank usually ends in death. Unfortunately, the lack of any explosive makes it impossible to destroy the tank if we hit anything other than the ammunition or the crew. Additionally, I said earlier, they like to bounce. The next round is APC. They have a nose cap of softer metal which is fixed to the front of the solid shot. Additionally, the cap will collapse on contact with armor and the deformation will cause the round to angle towards the armor. This round you see is very similar to the previous one, but it has also a aerodynamic cone at the front. This is simply an extension of the previous round. It's not the best shell, but it definitely has better penetrating properties than the previous two. And now, one of the most frequently used projectiles in this segment, APCBC. It has the best properties among these mentioned, and it's also often used with explosives inside. After piercing the armor, it leaves a hole regularly like this. And now we move to the projectiles filled with explosives. In short, they are very similar to kinetic projectiles, but filled with the so-called LOF. The feeling of the TNT shell is associated with the polar armor penetration, because the round has less integral structure. However, in direct combat, the force of the explosion itself is more important than the kinetic energy. However, if you use smaller caliber guns, even the additional materials contained inside are not able to destroy the entire tank with one shot. Therefore, it's the best to shoot these villains at the center of the vehicle to inflict as much damage as possible to the components and the crew. Next one is APCBC. It only differs in that it has a ballistic cap at the front that improves aerodynamics and giving you more pen over range. With good aiming, they destroy the target in the first shot. And remember to watch out for flying tank turrets. Of course, these bullets have different amounts of explosive depending on the caliber. Sometimes such a shot can be spectacular. A rare type of projectile are anti-concrete projectiles. Their purpose is to penetrate reinforced concrete and bunkers. It works similar to APG, but it has more explosive filler. Actually, it's a curiosity because this type practically doesn't appear in the game. But I must admit that it works great against weakly armored targets. The next type occurs mainly in anti-aircrafts. These are armor-piercing projectiles made of lower quality steel, which reduces their penetration power. This disadvantage is usually compensated by the projectile's increased high explosive charge. To be honest, I think they are useless and I don't like using them. The only thing is that they leave such cool holes. This type is practically the same as the previous one, but it used in large caliber guns. Despite their enormous mass and striking power, they are unable to penetrate thicker steel. The greatest wound you can inflict on your opponent is to leave such an ugly mark. It looks hilarious. Once you penetrate the armor, it is almost always a kill. Interesting fact, these shells are mainly used by warships, and I must admit that getting hit by such a cannon is not the most pleasant thing. This is what the hole looks like after the puncture. The next type of shell is APCR. These ones often use tungsten carbide or other extremely hard metal as a sub-caliber penetrator, wrapped within a softer full-caliber sabot. They often suffer due to their more consecrated post-penetration damage, as well as faster penetration drop-off over range than standard AP rounds. For comparison, we can see that they have much higher penetration than AP rounds, but this can be misleading. Due to their design, APCR performs extremely poorly when fired upon angled armor, and will ricochet on much smaller angles than AP or APDS. Now a shell that may seem similar, but it's not. After firing the APDS, the sabot is discarded after leaving the barrel. The result is an extremely high velocity round with particularly high penetration values. Unlike APCRs, APDS does not suffer when used against angled armor. However, since these shells are very small, they require precise aiming at the tank's components or a crew. And now the so-called darts, used primarily on the highest BRs. These are the most powerful kinetic rounds in the game. They do not care about layer armor, chemical era, or other such inventions. They also have incredible penetration of angled armor. Like APDS, darts utilizes an extremely hard penetrator and discarding sabot. However, the penetrator is typically much more longer than in the APDS and features rips to improve long-range ballistics. The additional length of the penetrator improves the damage effect on penetration. As I said, these projectiles are kinetic. Sometimes hitting an enemy vehicle doesn't destroy it because there is no explosive material. But at least shooting at armor at such angle doesn't make the slightest impression of them. And now something everyone has been waiting for. HE shells. These cruel things are filled with pure explosive and nothing else. Appears in every second vehicle in the game, regardless of the gun caliber. Previously you saw the Puma, which has 50mm caliber, and now the 155mm self-propelled gun. The only difference is the amount of loft measured in kilograms. HE shells don't have much penetration, but the exploding mass itself does all the damage. And that's why small caliber HE shells can destroy tanks. They are only effective against, for example, infantry. But you only need to load the right amount of the secret ingredient to make the projectile useful for anything. An additional advantage is that using them is incredibly pleasant and satisfying. Unfortunately, as it might seem, it's not enough to shoot an enemy to destroy him. You have to aim at the armor which is not flat, because otherwise you will only just dent the bodywork. If you have a vehicle with a large caliber, I would advise you to aim at the top of the tanks, because that's where they have the least armor. Or if you don't have the opportunity because the opponent is too high, you can shoot under the trucks. The next bullets are some of my favorites. These are HE projectiles with a proximity fuse. They are incredibly effective against flying targets. Usually one shot is enough to destroy the target. It depends on the trigger range, which can be from a few meters to even a dozens or so meters. They are very easy to aim, and the fact that you don't have to hit directly makes the game much easier. They can be switched to an impact fuse, so they are equally effective against ground targets. Vehicles from China have the greatest range of destruction, 15 meters. The next type is HE with time fuse. They use the distance from the target to set a time fuse that detonates the shell after traveling a certain distance. If we don't measure the distance, the mechanism won't work, which you can see on the screen. But remember that if the target is moving, it is difficult to measure the correct distance, which results in overshooting. But if the target moves away, the shell does not even reach it. As for shooting at ground targets, I would rather tune off the mechanism, because it only gets in the way. And now something that is rather rare and no one uses it: shrapnel shells. They have a chamber inside filled with metal elements or ball bearings with a small explosive charge. Upon successful penetration, shrapnel rounds cause a significant amount of damage. Unfortunately, when it comes to penetration, they are not the strongest player. They are effective only against super lightly armored tanks, nothing else. Sometimes even a generally recognized unarmored tank has too thick armor. And now we return to explosive, but in less direct way. Something that many may consider HE shells, but it's not. High explosive squash head. In short, HESH. The main thing is that we have a plastic warhead that adapts to the angle of the armor. The external explosion causes fragments from the other side of the armor to break off and kill the crew and damage the components. In case of penetration, the damage is enormous. These shells are used only in the largest caliber guns and mostly in the British nation. Unlike high explosive rounds, they sometimes have a point effect on heavily armored targets. So in such situation you should aim at the center of the tank to do as much damage as possible. Or another solution is to aim at the top of the turret where the armor is the smallest, and this causes overpressure which kills the crew. Since these rounds are heavy, they usually have a very low muzzle velocity. It often ends with simply missing the target or the shell simply missing tank in longer distance. Like in that situation. Rounds fly with a great trajectory, so if someone is moving, it is practically impossible to hit them, but up close they work great. Hits operate using a shaped charge that uses an explosive charge to drive super plastic metal into the vehicle's armor, causing internal damage to the crew and modules. And here you can see what it looks like in practice. They literally burn their way inside. The downside of these projectiles is that they can be easily blocked by the layered armor. Fortunately, in most cases at low levels such inventions do not occur, so they can penetrate the armor like the butter. They also handle armor angles quite well. However, you must remember that if you are shooting at something that has really good armor, you should aim at the weak spots, as in the case of substandard bullets. The shells themselves do not lose penetration over the distance traveled, and even though they act mainly chemically, they can bounce off sharp angles. These rounds you see are improved version of the previous ones, using improved penetrative chemicals and utilizing fins for improved ballistic performance. They do not lose penetration with distance, but they are very sensitive to any obstacles such as fences, trees or other things. Of course they were great against basic steel armor, but they are completely incapable of dealing with layered armor, same like heat shells. Next is HEATFS, which sounds the same, but in practice they look a little different. They are specialized heat rounds which utilize a proximity fuse to detonate when it close to the target. They can be used to destroy low-flying aircrafts or airplanes, while maintaining their effectiveness against ground vehicles utilizing normal hits technology. In addition to the two mentioned, there is a third type of these shells. This is multi-purpose heat round, but modified for penetrating obstacles before exploding. Generally, it is present in a very small number of tanks and players do not even notice that it exists. And here I'm trying to check how it works. I would rather choose a regular HEATFS than this one because it has less penetration. Another round is quite interesting is the smoke, which many believe cannot kill. This can be considered true because it has virtually no penetration. Its role is solely to create a smoke screen. After a few seconds, a huge white bubble forms and covers you. However, if you are brave enough to use them in battle, there is a very small chance that you will kill someone. Another weapon is the VOC filter grenade. Very few vehicles have it. It is an additional weapon that does not appear in the lower box. It works practically the same way as the HE shell. It contains an explosive charge that can destroy lightly armored targets, but mainly it is used to remove nature or obstacles. Another weapon of mass destruction is an ordinary rocket. Works in the same way as HE shell, except that the caliber is often much larger than the standard tank guns. Against unarmored vehicles they are incredibly deadly. When it comes to medium and heavy armored vehicles, rockets have no problem with them either. Sometimes they are the only solution to destroy a tank that spreads terror on the battlefield. Just a quick fact, RBT-5 has the largest rocket available in the game. It looks comical on such a small tank and reassembles a bit of a bullhorns. It has an enormous mass and caliber that allows it to destroy any tank in the game. It is also a slow monster and requires very hard aiming, which you can see in the crosshair. Because it's so big, it is difficult to hit with it and it's not accurate itself. Fortunately, the firepower is so huge that even a slight touch to the vehicle usually ends the game. The previous shot wasn't the best, but this one seems to end the fun. We must remember that such an explosion can often pose that threat to us as well. And the interesting thing is that this rocket works like a big bomb. You don't even need to hit it centrally to destroy someone. The next type is the HE grenade. It is relatively rare and works similar to HE shell, but has less explosive charge. It also has a very low muzzle velocity, making it difficult to hit moving targets. I generally don't recommend using it because it's quite poor quality and almost never destroy the opponent in the way you want. The next type are HE grenades. They are practically the same as the previous one, but instead of an explosive charge they work in the way similar to HEATS. They are often used in recoilless guns or other non-standard guns designs. They are terribly slow, so they have a limited range. Now we move to the rockets that have their own propulsion. They leave a similar mark on the armor after penetration as other projectiles, but they are much larger. They usually have high penetration but are not resistant to layered and reactive armor, but they have a much greater range than the regular shells. There are different types of aiming, and the first and the most basic one is manual aiming via the keyboard. This is one of the most difficult skills because it requires a lot of precision and time for the projectile to reach the target. Additionally, guiding the rocket prevents the tank from moving, so before launching it you have to find a safe place where you will spend the next dozens or so seconds. Another type of aiming is manual aiming, but by using the mouse. It is incomparably easier because it gives you a full control over the projectile and the ability to move the tank. The last type are ER guided missiles. In this case they are tandem missiles, but they work the same as the regular ones. I just couldn't find a vehicle that has them. They are called fire and forget because you lock onto the target, fire a projectile, and it does everything for you. Regardless of whether the vehicle is stationary or moving, the projectile will adjust its direction and hit the target precisely. Additionally, they allow you to target several targets at the same time. Now we move on to the tandem rockets, which may look similar but they are completely different. They have enormous armor penetration and are resistant to reactive armor. They usually have a longer range and are faster than normal missiles. An additional advantage is the angle of attack, which is huge. As you can imagine, this missile has no problem against any type of tank. You don't even need to aim at the weak spots, as the missile size and the mass are sufficient to destroy a vehicle in a single shot. The highest penetration of the tandem missile is achieved by the Chinese helicopter. It is 1400 mm. Even though the appearance of this missile is the same as the regular missile, it works in a completely different way. You may notice that the armor penetration is minimal, but this is because this projectile hits from the top of the vehicle. This particular rocket has only 100 mm of penetration, but it is enough to penetrate the armor from above. To increase the effectiveness of the impact, I personally aim a little lower so that the projectile explosion is as close to the armor as possible. Unfortunately, these rockets are completely vulnerable to layered and reactive armor, so when shooting at some vehicles you should keep this in mind. The big advantage, however, is that you can shoot them out of the cover without showing yourself. On some maps there is a skill that you can change the tide of the battle. One of the next manually guided missiles is the ATGM-VT. Unlike the previous one, it is filled mainly with explosive and has a proximity fuse. It usually has a very long range and is extremely effective against flying objects. Can also be used to penetrate armor, but it's not the strongest point. It works on low armor targets, but if someone has even a little more body fat, it won't do anything. A solution may be the aim at the turret. Unfortunately, long range doesn't go hand in hand with speed. Therefore, even planes that are relatively close can easily avoid it. It is a good rocket, but it needs to be used in the very specific situations. Another type of missile is ATGM ATGM-HE, but without a proximity fuse. I personally don't use them because in my opinion they are almost useless. SAMs are high velocity anti-air missiles designed specifically to combat aircrafts, often including proximity fuses and radar or heat-seeking guidance. Heat-seeking missiles can really make life easier because you don't need any skill to destroy enemies. The rockets does everything for you and you can shoot several targets at the same time. And now we move on to the projectiles that have a proximity fuse, which means that if an object appears within their range, they explode. Before the last type of the missiles, there are missiles that are radar guided. These are quite specific projectiles because they are found only in the punctured SMS file. This means that if you fire them without using radar, they won't explode. Locking the target means that the rocket knows where it is and can therefore explode within its range. The last projectiles are equipped with their own radar transmitter. They are incredibly effective at long ranges and are flare resistant. They are only used in vehicles placed at the very end of a given country technology tree. They usually have the ability to shoot at several targets at once. I hope you liked the video and learned something from it. Even if you knew a lot, I hope I surprised you with some of the rockets. I hope that the interesting facts also enhance the experience of the episode. Thank you very much for watching and I hope you have a wonderful day.